Have you ever, really stopped and asked yourself, what is this feeling of me sitting here thinking, listening? This sense of, and maybe even deeper, what is this present moment you feel like you're in right now?
It's maybe the ultimate question for a deep dive like this. Because, well, for us conscious humans, there's no denying it. A self feels present. We experience it physically, emotionally, cognitively.
Right, it feels fundamental.
It does. But the sources we're digging into today, they present this pretty staggering idea
Yeah.
that this feeling, this phenomenal selfhood, isn't just a given. It's actually a massive, incredibly complex construction happening inside the brain.
And that's really our mission for this session, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're looking at some sources that propose a, frankly, quite aggressive neuroscientific model. One suggesting the very core of consciousness, what we call the self, is built on a kind of sophisticated functional fiction.
Exactly. We need to unpack two key theoretical concepts here.
Yep.
Things needed for subjective experience to even happen.
Right.
The phenomenal self model, that's the PSM, and something called the phenomenal model of the intentionality relation, or PMIR.
Okay, PSM and PMIR. So we're basically exploring the hidden architecture, the sort of representational deep structure that makes having a first-person perspective possible in the first place.
That's the goal, getting into how that feeling of you gets built.
All right. Let's kick off with maybe the most mind-bending idea right at the foundation. Our sources seem really uncompromising on this.
Yeah.
Phenomenal experience. What you see and feel right now, it's not a direct window onto reality. Not at all.
That's precisely it. Instead, think of your conscious reality more like a dynamic, multi-layered map of the world. And crucially, it's generated entirely internally by your brain.
A map generated internally.
Yeah. Which means phenomenal reality, everything you perceive it, depends exclusively on what's happening inside your brain, internal system properties. It's basically an internal, constantly updated hypothesis about what the world out there must be like.
Okay, wait. If it's a hypothesis, an internal model, that immediately brings up a timing issue, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because making hypotheses, processing information, that takes time.
You've hit it exactly. That leads straight to what the sources call the temporal fiction. Your brain is constantly processing, filtering, integrating signals from the world. But that process, neurologically speaking, it's not instantaneous. It's actually kind of slow compared to, say, the speed of light.
Right. Milliseconds count here.
They absolutely do. So the moment you experience as the now, this very instant, is necessarily a constructive hypothesis. It's what the sources call a simulated now. You are quite literally never in direct contact with the actual objective present. You're always living fractionally in the past, presented as the present.
That makes a kind of chilling sense from an engineering perspective. But, okay, if my reality is this slightly delayed simulation, how does the brain pull this off so seamlessly? Why don't I feel the lag? How does it convince me I'm looking directly at reality?
Well, that's the function of something called phenomenal transparency. Transparency is the key trick, the mechanism that hides the fact that it is a model. It turns the internal map into an appearance, into what feels like direct, unmediated reality.
Like a perfect window pane. You see the view, not the glass itself.
Exactly like that. A flawless simulation screen, maybe? The system generates the model, but it simultaneously makes the modeling process itself invisible to conscious experience.
So you can't see the screen you're looking at.
Precisely. The system cannot recognize its world model as a model. The vehicle of representation, the underlying structure, isn't available for your attention to grasp. And because of that limitation, you're essentially forced into becoming what the model calls a naive realist.
A naive realist, meaning I just assume what I see is what's there.
Yes. You look through the simulation, believing you're looking at the world itself. The mechanism hides itself.
Wow. Okay, so this isn't just about how things feel. It points to a kind of structural limit, a limit on self-knowledge within the system itself.
It does, and that structural limit has a specific name in this framework. Autoepistemic closure. Think of it as an inbuilt blind spot.
Autoepistemic closure, like self-knowledge closure.
Kind of, yeah. The system is structurally unable to consciously experience the fact that its subjective reality is built on, well, counterfactual content and this temporal lag. We just can't be aware that we're looking at the output of a filter because the filter itself operates non-consciously.
So, if I'm following this, we're like pilots in an incredibly advanced flight simulator. But the simulator is so perfect, the pilot is structurally incapable of knowing they're in a simulator. It's built into the design for it to work.
That's a great analogy. The sources use a slightly different one, maybe a bit more humbling. They say structurally, we're like neurophenomenological cavemen. We simply cannot consciously grasp that our reality model is internal, that closure isn't optional, it's how the system functions.
Deeply humbling is right. Okay, if the world I experience is this transparent simulation, where does the I fit in? The subjective self that feels like it persists through time.
Right, the feeling of continuity. That's where the phenomenal self model, the PSM, comes in. If your conscious reality is this complex dynamic map, well, the PSM is the functional core of that map. Conceptually, you can think of it as the little red arrow indicating you are here.
The little red arrow.
It's the brain's internal image, its self-representation generated by the system, about the system itself.
Hang on, if it's just another part of the model, why does it feel so solid, so anchored in this body, right here? It doesn't feel like just an arrow on a map.
That's a crucial point, and it shows the sophistication. The PSM isn't just like abstract software. It maintains a persistent functional link to the body's actual physical state. It constantly pulls in information from the very lowest levels of processing the stuff keeping you alive.
You mean like basic biological signals?
Exactly. It taps into ancient structures. The sources mention things like the upper brainstem, the hypothalamus, these neurohemal organs.
Areas controlling breathing, temperature, basic survival drives.
Precisely those. This constant stream of low-level physiological feedback creates what's termed self-presentational content. And that content provides the continuous non-conceptual feeling of simply existing, of being situated right here, right now. It's why the self feels embodied, owned, and unbroken through time. It's tethered to the body's ongoing bioregulation.
Okay, so that anchoring function means the PSM isn't just a label. It actually structures the whole experience. It ensures the entire reality model is centered or egocentric. It ties me, the cognitive system, into my own conscious map.
And that egocentric centering is absolutely vital. It allows the system, as the sources put it, to live in as well as with this model. Without that PSM anchor, the internal map would just be, well, a representation of objects floating around with no self-point for reference, no basis for action or survival relevance.
Functionally speaking, this sounds incredibly efficient, like a massive computational shortcut.
Oh, absolutely. The PSM is framed as a really advanced tool for intelligence. It bridges the gap between the actual and the potential. It integrates the basic bioregulatory information processing, that's the actual state of your body right now, with higher order cognitive contents simulating possible states. That's the possible, like planning or imagining future actions.
So building this coherent self-model helps manage complexity.
Definitely. It's seen as a strategy for reducing ambiguity and significantly cutting down the computational load. If you have a stable reference point, you don't need to calculate everything from scratch every single moment. It saves resources.
Okay, so we've got the self, the PSM, this anchored red arrow on the map. But consciousness isn't just about being a reference point. We act, we direct our attention, we make choices. How does this seemingly static PSM become an agent?
Right, and that brings us to the second key theoretical piece we mentioned earlier, the part that gives us directionality, intentionality. The phenomenal model of the intentionality relation, the PMIR.
Intentionality.
Yeah,
The philosophical idea that consciousness is always about something directed towards something.
that's the one.
Yeah.
The PMIR is the brain's model of that very subject-object relationship. And what's fascinating is how this apparently feels phenomenally. It's described as the subjective sense of an arrow pointing from the self-model to an object component in your experience.
The arrow from me to the thing I'm focused on.
Exactly. This modeled relationship, this directedness is what creates perspectivalness, the fundamental fact that your consciousness is always tied to your unique first-person point of view.
So, if the PSM is who I feel I am, the PMIR is how I relate to the world, what I'm paying attention to, maybe what I intend to do. This seems to lead directly to agency, the feeling of will.
It does. The sources argue that conscious volition, agency, emerges when things like abstract goals or specific imagined actions get integrated into this PMIR structure as the object component. When you decide, I will reach for that cup, that decision corresponds to successfully locking that goal state into the intentionality model.
So the feeling of control, what we call free will perhaps, or phenomenal agency. It's the system's high-level representation of having successfully selected an action or a goal from possibilities. It's the feeling of successful selection.
That's a good way to put it. It's the globally available signal saying selection successful. The magic here is how you get from micro-level stuff, just neurons firing, to macro properties like personhood and choice. The PSM-PMIR framework is proposed as the mechanism. It allows the whole system to functionally appropriate these lower-level subpersonal selection processes.
Functionally appropriate, meaning the self takes ownership or credit for the choice.
Kind of, yes. You feel like you chose, even though the underlying neural machinery did the complex selection work beforehand. The PSM-PMIR claims that successful output as its own intentional act.
Right. This is getting complex but hangs together. If consciousness is this kind of delicate, transparent simulation built on the PSM and PMIR, then looking at cases where the model breaks down should be really telling.
Absolutely. These neurophenomenological case studies are fascinating testing grounds for the theory. Take blindsight, for example.
Blind sight.
Yeah,
Patients with damage to their visual cortex, right. They insist they can't see anything.
correct. They report zero conscious visual experience in a part of their visual field. Yet if you force them to guess, say, is the light horizontal or vertical? Where's the spot of light? They guess correctly way, way above chance levels.
So the information is clearly getting in, is processed. It can even guide their guesses or hand movements if you ask them to reach for something they claim not to see.
Right.
But it's not conscious.
It perfectly illustrates the distinction. Non-conscious information can be functionally active, available for some basic motor responses or forced choice guesses, but it's not phenomenally represented. It hasn't been integrated into the global workspace made available by the PSM-PMIR system for flexible, conscious action control.
Okay, then what about cases where the PSM itself seems to fail to update correctly?
Huh.
Like anosognosia denying a major deficit like paralysis, or even blindness in Anton syndrome.
Anosognosia is truly bizarre. You can have a patient who is demonstrably paralyzed on one side of their body, yet they'll confidently insist they can move it just fine, maybe that they're just resting it.
How does the model explain that?
It's interpreted as a failure of the PSM to integrate the new catastrophic information about the body's state. The pre-existing transparent self-model, the one that says, I am physically capable, is somehow resisting this major update. It's fighting to maintain its coherence, its stability.
And there's that incredible intervention mentioned in the sources, caloric stimulation, injecting cold water into the ear.
Yes, it's astonishing. The cold water triggers a strong vestibular response, basically confusing the brain's sense of balance and orientation. And for a brief window while that's happening, it seems to disrupt the faulty self-model.
What happens?
The patient suddenly gains full insight. They'll acknowledge the paralysis, maybe even recall the accident that caused it, access correct autobiographical information. It's like the denial is temporarily lifted.
For just a few moments.
Usually just while the stimulation lasts. And then almost as soon as it wears off, the source says the old transparent self-model is reinstated. Boom. They're back to denying the paralysis. The brain just snaps back to its preferred, albeit incorrect, fiction.
That's deeply weird. It really highlights the constructed and sometimes resistant nature of the self-model. Then you have the opposite situation almost. Phantom limbs, showing the simulation runs even with no physical input.
Phantom limbs are powerful evidence. They're often experienced with total mindness, this is my arm, and full transparency, it feels completely real. People can feel itching, pain, gestures in a limb that isn't there.
And this even happens in cases of congenital aplasia, right? People born without a limb.
Correct, which strongly suggests the body map, the limb representation within the PSM, is fundamentally a simulation, perhaps even genetically predisposed. It's a possibility displayed as a reality. The simulation mechanism can run independently of confirming sensory input.
Okay, one more case. Lucid dreaming. This seems unique because it's where transparency breaks.
Exactly. If waking life is defined by its seamless transparency, lucid dreams are described as becoming, at least momentarily, globally opaque.
Opaque meaning
Yeah.
you see the simulation as a simulation.
Precisely. That moment of insight, aha, I'm dreaming, means the simulational character of the whole experience becomes cognitively available. There's a German term used, Zustandsklarheit, meaning state clarity.
And what happens when you get that state clarity?
According to the model, that loss of naive realism, that crack in transparency, immediately frees up the system. It establishes full-blown agency within the dream world. Knowing the map is just a map lets you navigate it intentionally, using the PMIR to direct actions within the dream simulation.
Wow. Okay, pulling all this together, this whole deep dive into the PSM and PMIR gives us a really functional, almost mechanistic view of consciousness. So why? Why did nature build us this way? What's the point?
Well, the evolutionary argument proposed by the model is that building this sophisticated PSM-PMIR system conferred a massive adaptive advantage. Primarily, it seems to have dramatically increased our behavioral flexibility.
Flexibility, how?
By enabling really complex, goal-directed behavior, long-term planning, thinking about counterfactuals, and crucially, the advanced social cognition, understanding other minds, predicting their behavior that seems so central to being human, it allows us to navigate a much more complex world.
But there's a profound ethical angle here, too, which the sources raise, especially concerning suffering. If phenomenal selfhood really just is the presence of a functioning PSM,
Then the implication gets quite provocative. The principle of minimal ethical consideration suggests we should perhaps treat any system capable of activating a PSM, no matter how basic, as a potential moral object.
why? Because of suffering.
Because the very capacity to suffer seems tied to that fundamental, non-conceptual sense of mindness that the PSM provides. If a system can genuinely own its experiences, then it can, in principle, own its suffering. That subjective quality is key.
Which brings us right back to the sort of design flaw, or maybe design feature, depending on your perspective. Nature didn't optimize us for objective truth, right? It optimized us for survival.
That seems to be the case. The sources even suggest our emotional self model might be more of a weapon than an instrument to accurately represent reality. We might be wired for certain kinds of self-deception because they aided survival or social bonding. We operate under this default, naive, realistic self-misunderstanding.
It's like there's this inbuilt deficit making radical self-knowledge really, really hard, maybe impossible structurally.
It presents a fundamental challenge. So the final question, maybe for you listening, is this. If transparency, this feeling of direct contact with reality, is a necessary fiction hardwired into our biology, what would it actually take to intentionally try and minimize that transparency, to consistently see the simulation as simulation?
Can we overcome that cognitive blind spot Mother Nature seems to have built in? Is the pursuit of total self-awareness fundamentally a battle against our own design?
A battle against our own foundational structure. It's definitely something to chew on.